power behind the scenes. So the final example I have is this little bit more complex application, which consists of a table as well. This table, it's has again two colors, shape type and shape color, and I can select either of them. Then I have this color picker here, so I can select a different color for each of the shapes. And I can also adjust the size of each of the shapes using this slider. So a couple of things which we haven't seen yet are this color picker and this slider in addition to the table. And as said, the table is used in a little bit more complex manner. So looking at the code, first I have some constants to define integers to refer to the different shapes that this application can display. I have the slider. This is the slider component here. I have flow pane, so these are shapes are in flow pane. As you may remember, put items first here, then here, then here, then here, then here, and then it grabs the second line if necessary, and you can control some of the parameters. But I'm using it very quickly and in a minimum way here, not in the focus of the application. And then I have a color picker. I define a new color picker. And then I have table view, just like the previous example. In this case, the shape info class, this is similar to the file info in the previous example. And yeah, creating it, and similarly, observable list of shape infos is given here, and here I'm actually creating the observable JavaFX observable list. I'm just giving those initial values, those new shapes, immediately here. The actual list is this final here, so no new observable array can be put there. But of course, once you have created the observable array, you can clear it so it's empty. You can add new items, remove items, and so on. Regular main method. Then to the start, building the application, setting the title, initial size of the application, and then defining the columns, shape type column, giving the name there, the width, and then cell value factory. And if you look at the previous example, setting the cell value factory to the property value factory. But in this case, I'm defining a new callback here, which has this structure of cell data features, and it has shape info and integer, and observable value and string, very complex looking thing. But the point is that here I can now, when I'm giving as the parameter this callback, I can define this function or this method call. It returns observable value and of type string, as I have defined here, and well, receives cell data features, shape info, and integer p. So here I can control actually what is displayed there instead of setting this string properties and already on the property level defining what is the value that needs to be displayed. Now, when we look at the later in this shape info, we see that it contains actually not strings but values. And here I'm getting the value. The P here is the shape info object, and I get the value and get the shape type, and this is the integer, is one of those constants I defined there. And using the switch statement, I'm just returning rectangle, circle, or unknown. That should never happen. So this function actually tells what text appears here. So in the data structure that's filling the table, there can actually be something totally else. And in my code, I decide what sort of actual text to display. That's similar for the second column, the color column, and setting the width, setting the set value factory for the callback. This is very complex piece syntactically, but conceptually rather straightforward. And when you start using it first, like copy and pasting it and then trying to figure it out, is probably the best route. There is get color in this shape information, which is a color object. The color object is part of the JavaFX. If you look at the import again, it's Java scene paint color. This is what you can provide to many of the elements. And from there, we can, for example, get red, green, and blue values. And returning here a simple string property. In this case, well, I could actually do same as here, just returning a string. And just building this string, which you see here. So I'm building this string myself, RGB, something. And it updates when the color is changed. So these define what actually is displayed in these particular cells in this each of the columns, and each of them gets this data from the shape info object, and this data can be, in this case is integer, in this case it's this color object, and I'm just building the string I want to be shown in the table. I set the items just like in the previous one, and then table get columns I add all. I think this was also in the previous example, so you need to get all the columns, of course, to the table. And there is this color picker, and in the interfaces, this is basically the color picker, but it also includes this other elements here. But when you put it into the interface, it's this small drop-down thing opening element. It has regular set on action event handler possibility, and there I just call get value. So basically this happens when the user has just selected something, and then from the get value you get this color object. And then from the table, again with the get selection model, I get selected index, so to know which of the lines have been selected. And shape infos contain all the shape info objects, so I get the relevant one, the selected one, and then I call set color on that one. And then into the shape infos, I set this particular shape info in there. So basically putting back the same thing that was already there. But this is, I do this because it's this observable list. And then if somebody is listening to that particular list, they get notified that, okay, now something has changed. And I'm not listening to that, but the table itself is listening to that. So if I don't do this, the table actually, you can try it yourself to see if the table updates if you don't do this. Then I call in this build shapes, which is a method I defined myself that updates the graphics in the bottom. For the shape table, I have also registered this set on mouse clicked. So when the user clicks on this table, this event handler runs. Again, I get the selection method to get the selected index. If that is at least 0, it means something is selected. It can be -1 if nothing is selected. For example, if user clicks with Control pressed on the selection, then there is nothing selected. I get the shape info object again. The sizer is the slider, this slider here, which is disabled right now because nothing is selected. And now when I click something, it gets selected. And what I'm doing here is I'm setting the value of the slider to be the correct one, and also doing the disabling and enabling. So I set the value of the sizer slider and I enable it. And I also set the value of the color picker. So every time the user clicks on something, you can see that both this color picker color changes and the slider value changes. So I'm doing those here. And then if the click count of this mouse event was 2, then I show the color picker. So the user can either go this way, or if they double click here, then the color picker opens automatically. And if the selected index was less than 0, so nothing is selected, then I disable the slider. So like this, now the slider is disabled. When I clicked here with Control pressed, click the last selected item on the table with Control pressed. Okay. For the layout, I'm using border pane, putting color picker to the top. Here, shape table to the center here. And then creating this flow pane for the visuals, setting the minimum size for that, minimum width, also maximum height, so that the height is always 100. It cannot it shouldn't grow beyond 100, but width be at least 300. Then call this build shapes, which updates those graphics, and creating the slider, setting the minimum value, maximum value, current value, and enabling or disabling it. And then also this label, I don't think we have used this label before. It's for displaying text that especially meant to indicate something. So this size is a label, and the label has this set label for, and I'm telling it's label for the sizer, so it's related to this component. Recommended thing to do when you are using the label. And finally, I'm listening to the couple of things. Listening to the changes of the slider value. So when the user moves the slider, you can listen to it by get property, add listener, and then there's change listener. and it's of type number because slider is used to select numbers. Above here, we set the minimum value and maximum value and the initial value, and there are some other parameters you can use to configure how it looks and how precise it can be controlled. So it's a number because the slider is used to select between numbers, and then the value is changed. You get this observable value which extends number, and then you get the old value and the new value. This number object. I again get the selected index from the table selection model, and if something is selected from the shape infos, I get the selected one, and then I'm setting the size to the new value, and this is number object, and here I want to give an integer, so I call the int value method, and then again build shapes to update the graphics. Using box here, horizontal box, adding the slider table and the sizer so that they go side by side in this horizontal box, adding insights and spacing to put some space around these components, around them and between them, and adding them at the same time, and then setting that to the bottom of the border pane. So again, border pane top, middle, bottom. So there is the vertical box containing these graphics and these things, and these are in the horizontal box. Using these different kinds of boxes and border pane together to come up with this overall layout and structure. Setting the border pane to the same, showing it in, and well, this is in a funny place, but one more listener. Please change listener for the shape infos, and when the shape info list changes, I call the build shapes. So now we get to the build shapes at this point. So this one updates these graphics in the bottom whenever something happens, when the color changes or the slider is moved. It updates those visual elements. It works a little bit funny because these are these components, and when they are resized, their layout of the interface changes. It's not the key content here, it's more about listening to these different elements, and so the build shapes is not the key thing here, but I will explain it quickly. So first I remove all the elements from the visual. So the visual was this flow pane defined here. First remove all the existing components. I'm not recycling anything, so it's not the most optimal way to do this perhaps, but works just fine. Remove all the current components, put through the shape infos, and with the switch, create this shape object, which is either rectangle or circle. Using the size here, size for the circle, it's half the size because this parameter for the circle is the radius, and for the rectangle is the width and height. So to keep them about the same scale, I divide by 2 here. And then I set the fill to be the color, and then I add the shape to the children of the visual. So this updates. Every time you see something change, it's actually everything from here is removed and new objects are created. So that kind of things actually happen reasonably fast. you shouldn't really go optimizing things until you see that things don't work fluently. And then finally this shape info, which is now a little bit bigger. So this is the object that is stored as the data behind the table, or model, as I will explain terminology a little bit more. So this observable list of this shape infos is the model of the table, the data that's displayed in the table. Again, I have these properties. I have simple integer property, two simple integer properties actually, and then simple object property constructor where I get the int type, color object, and int for the size. And just put them there into these simple integer and object properties. And then I have these getter methods for the shape type, color, and size. And again, these match the columns. And well, actually, so in this case, they don't match the names here because I'm not using the, in the previous one, the tables demo, I used this property value factory. And in this case, I'm not using the property value factory. I'm using these callbacks, and I just get shape type and I get the color, and I'm not getting the size here because it's not displayed in the table. So this is now an alternative to just properties and gives me a possibility to define what's actually displayed at this point. And here, these are very simple, these get methods, shape type get, color get, casting it the color here, and size get. And then I have also set methods, just similar ones. So there are different places where you can control what is actually shown in the table. I could, of course, write into these methods some processing which builds some sort of string representation of the values which are inside here. I can define how things look at this level, or I can just use these simple string properties and, like in the previous example, using the default property system in there and just fill the data originally in the form I want to display. In this case, the color is perhaps the most interesting thing. So here I'm defining how I want to show the color in the table, showing this string, and in this shape infos, I'm actually having a color as the return value, and doing this simple object property, I'm keeping the color object. So any object can be inside this model, and then I can display it in the table any way I want, and I can also access the values and store their values that I'm not using in the table, but for example, the size in this case it's used elsewhere, but it's stored in the same data structure where the information that goes into the table is stored. So this helps the data to stay in one place, but you can still control exactly how you want to show it. And the color is, of course, relevant as well to be an object, so that whatever I get out of this color picker, that object is actually what goes into this shape info object and inside the list, and then that is converted into these strings, and that is used to define the color of these shapes as well. So everywhere the color is a color object, and size is an integer object, and the shape type is an integer object. And the text that is displayed here and here, those are defined in these callbacks. So that there is one place, and that's part of the definition of the table columns, which defines how they are shown in the table. But of course, in other places, they can be displayed unused for different uses and different purposes. And for that, it's good to be able to store behind the scenes the actual objects which are most useful to you. So that was the third example we have for this week, and unless I get some questions, I think I will move to the summary slides. So let me share my screen again.